Joining me is One Nation leader Pauline Hanson. Pauline, great to see you again. What's your take on the Prime Minister's message to the nation?
I think he's very concerned about the polls and his popularity with the people, and so he's given this message to calm everyone down. Everything's fine. Where are we going? Let me say, Andrew, we've got about approximately 30 days supply right across the board, whether it's jet fuel, petrol or diesel. Now, Korea has more day supply than we have, and Japan has 200 days supply. Both of those countries are moving to actually implement rationing in both those countries. So that would tell you something. I'm really concerned about where we are, and on the ground, and I was in the Cedar Farah last weekend, really concerns from the farming sector where they're saying, Pauline, we don't know whether we're going to put in our crops or not, but we don't know if we're going to have fuel in 6 months' time to actually harvest that.
Before we continue, do us a little favour by subscribing to the channel, because over 98% of you watching haven't subscribed. It costs you nothing, not even a penny to join this channel. Have you subscribed? Thanks so much.
Because it takes more fuel then to harvest than what it does now to put the crop in the ground. Fertilisers is now the big issue here. You know, we've seen the government say there's no crisis, there is a crisis, and then, you know, we got ships coming and ships were turned away. It's just been one blunder after another. I think they're very concerned. They haven't been upfront with the Australian people, and I think they need to. It was One Nation that pushed to cut the fuel excise, first and foremost. We actually advocated 3 months at 100%. We also said about the GST, which the states are now, you know, agreeing with, possibly to take off the GST as well. So it was One Nation advocated that, and I've got to say, after I spoke to Barnaby Joyce last weekend, he then spoke to the Prime Minister with regards to ensuring that the ships coming here to Australia, that we will underwrite if it delivers here and they shouldn't lose money out of it, so we can ensure fuel security to the people of Australia. We need to look after rural and regional areas. We must look after those essential services, the police, the AMBOs, the paramedics, the hospitals, all those essential services to ensure that they have fuel. And I think it's in real problems. And to hear him say we've actually got to drill more for oil or for those resources, they haven't. They rely on the Greens' vote in the Senate and in the lower house, mainly in the Senate. They've got the numbers in the lower house. So therefore, they're told by the Greens. The Greens want to shut down gas altogether, exploration in Australia. You can't explore for gas in the state of Victoria. They don't want you to explore it there. We cannot run this country on just wind and solar. It can't happen. And I go back to it, and I spoke about this in 2019 and 2021, where I laid out my concerns about the 90-day international fuel supply that we didn't have. I spoke about the refineries. In year 2000, we had 8 refineries. Now we're down to 2. I advocated that we are paying $2.3 billion to internationals to refine, and we're sending our money overseas, and we're going to shut down these refineries by 2027, possibly 2030. We have been absolutely fooled, and this is under both major political parties. Both of them have done this. Yeah, and Matt Canavan to say, I'm sorry, I've got to finish on this. Matt Canavan to say that we should be drilling oil here. Let me tell you, in 2019, and I took it to the Senate estimates as well, spoke about it on the floor of Parliament, we had East Timor, Timor-Leste. We were drilling up there an Australian company. Because Australia was caught spying on the Timorese, that actually went to court. That was in 2004. We found guilty. The coalition government then handed that oil over to Timor-Leste. So that was actually taking oil on the northern endeavour of around about up to, it could have in the past, but taken 180,000 barrels a day. They then closed in on that, handed that to Timor-Leste as the deal because of what the Australian government was doing, spying. That man was shut down, lost his business. It actually, you know, if we can actually take that over now, that can produce, there's still 30 million barrels of oil there that we can actually then extract and have that in Australia. But Matt Canavan, he actually would not release the report as minister at that time, and they did nothing about it. He's got a lot to answer for this, and I blame both the governments for this. And I think that we need to open it up, take control of that, extract the oil out of it. We've got to become self-sufficient in this country with our oil and gas.
Well, that's an interesting story there. I'll check that out on tomorrow's show and see what's what. Pauline Hanson, thank you so much.
Anthony Albanese stood before the nation this week and tried to tell Australians everything is under control. Calm down. The government has a plan. Trust us. Pauline Hanson watched that address and had a very different reaction. And when she sat down to give her response, she didn't hold back for a single second. Let's set the scene. The Prime Minister delivered a national address on the fuel crisis, a crisis his own government spent weeks insisting wasn't actually a crisis. He spoke in measured tones. He used reassuring language. He talked about supply announcements and government action and responsible management. It was the kind of address designed to make nervous Australians exhale and stop worrying. Hanson's first response was pointed. She said he gave that address because he is deeply worried about the polls. The message wasn't for Australia's fuel security, it was for his own political security. And when you look at the facts she laid out immediately afterward, it is genuinely difficult to argue with her. Australia has approximately 30 days of fuel supply across the board. Jet fuel, petrol and diesel, 30 days. South Korea has more than that. Japan has 200 days and is already moving toward rationing. Two of Australia's closest regional neighbours, countries with far more developed industrial infrastructure, are treating this situation as a genuine national emergency requiring rationing systems. Australia's Prime Minister is giving reassurance addresses. Think about that contrast for a moment. Japan, 200 days supply, moving to ration. Australia, 30 days supply, being told not to worry. Hanson had just returned from the Riverina last weekend when she sat down for this interview. She'd been on the ground in farming country, the seed of Farrer region, and what she heard from farmers was not reassurance. It was fear. Farmers told her directly they don't know whether they're going to plant their crops because they don't know if they'll have the fuel to harvest them 6 months from now. And here is the brutal agricultural reality that most city-based commentators miss entirely. It takes significantly more fuel to harvest a crop than to plant one. If fuel is uncertain now, the harvest is in serious jeopardy if the harvest fails. Out of the food supply chain tightens, and the people who feel that first and hardest are not inner city professionals. They are regional and rural Australians who are already stretched to breaking point. This is the emotional core of what Hanson was describing, not an abstract policy debate about energy markets. Real farmers in real paddocks in regional Australia sitting at their kitchen tables this week, genuinely unsure whether the crop they're about to put in the ground is worth planting. That is the human reality behind the Prime Minister's carefully worded national address. And fertiliser, she flagged that too, because it's not just about the diesel in the tractor. Fertiliser supply chains are now under pressure as well, and adding another layer of uncertainty onto an agricultural sector that was already navigating cost of living pressures, interest rate pain, and weather unpredictability. For the families running those properties, every new variable is another reason to lie awake at 3 a.m. The political chronology Hanson outlined this week is damning on its own terms. First, the government said there was no crisis. Then they said there was a crisis. Then ships were coming. Then ships were turned away. Each statement contradicted the one before it. Each announcement created fresh confusion rather than resolving the previous one. Blunder after blunder, she said, and she's not wrong. One nation, she pointed out, was ahead of this. It was one nation that first advocated cutting the fuel excise, pushing for a full 100% cut for 3 months. And well before the major parties moved, it was one nation that raised the GST issue on fuel, a position the states are now reportedly warming to. And it was Hanson herself who, after speaking directly with Barnaby Joyce last weekend, helped push the concept of underwriting fuel ships, guaranteeing that vessels delivering fuel to Australia won't lose money on the voyage, removing the commercial disincentive that was contributing to supply uncertainty. That is not a minor policy footnote. That is a practical solution to a real logistical problem developed outside the government's machinery and fed into the system through crossbench pressure. While the Prime Minister was preparing his national address, Hanson was on the phone to Barnaby Joyce working out how to keep fuel ships coming. The contrast in how these people spend their time is instructive. She also went straight at the energy contradiction at the heart of the Albanese government's position. The Prime Minister, in his address, gestured toward the need to develop more domestic resources. Hanson's response was crisp. His government cannot say that with a straight face, while depending on the Greens for their Senate numbers. The Greens want to shut down gas exploration in Australia entirely. Victoria already prohibits gas exploration within its borders. And a government that relies on Green support to pass legislation through the upper house is not in a position to credibly champion domestic fossil fuel development. No matter what the Prime Minister says at a podium, you cannot run Australia on wind and solar alone. That is Hanson's position, and she states it plainly every time she is asked. The baseload power problem. The fundamental engineering reality that renewable energy cannot yet reliably supply continuous power when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing does not disappear because a government committed to net zero tells people not to worry about it. The physics does not negotiate. And this is where the story gets historical and genuinely infuriating, because it isn't just this government's failure. Hanson went back to the numbers. In the year 2000, Australia had 8 oil refineries. Today, it has 2. For years, including during coalition governments, Australia was spending $2.3 billion sending raw product overseas to be refined, paying international companies to do work that Australian refineries used to do, employing Australian workers. Those refineries are now on a trajectory toward closure by 2027 or 2030. Both major parties oversaw this, both of them. That is a point Hanson makes with visible frustration, and it is one that neither Labour nor the Liberals can easily deflect. She also raised a story this week that deserves far more attention than it has received. In the Timor Sea, on a field called the Northern Endeavour, there are an estimated 30 million barrels of oil that could be extracted. An Australian company was drilling there. But in 2004, Australia was found guilty of spying on East Timor during negotiations over the Timor Sea Treaty, a scandal involving ACIS operatives bugging the Timor-Leste cabinet room. The fallout from that legal and diplomatic disaster resulted in Australia effectively handing control of that resource arrangement to Timor-Leste interests. The Australian company involved lost its business. The field has sat largely dormant, 30 million barrels sitting there. While Australia has 30 days of fuel supply and farmers in the Riverina don't know if they can harvest their crops. And when Senator Matt Canavan was the relevant minister with the power to investigate and potentially act on this, Hanson says he did not release the report and nothing was done. She is direct about this. He has questions to answer. Both major parties have presided over decisions, active and passive, that have left Australia exposed. This is not a partisan point. It is a structural indictment of decades of energy policy failure across the political spectrum. The political fallout from the week continued to build. On social media, the clip of Hanson's response to the PM's address was running hard by Thursday morning. The contrast between Albanese's composed prime ministerial tone and Hanson's plain-spoken urgency was generating exactly the kind of engagement that mainstream media coverage of the address had not. Regional Australians were sharing it, farming community Facebook groups were posting it, tradies and small business owners who depend on diesel were tagging their mates. In state capitals, premiers were watching the situation nervously. The fuel excise discussion, which One Nation put on the table first and was now being discussed seriously in state treasuries, the GST angle, which several state governments had initially dismissed, was back in play. When the political momentum shifts fast enough, the states start moving too, and this week that movement was visible. Internationally, the context Hanson raised about Japan and South Korea moving to ration was not an exaggeration. Energy security analysts had been flagging for weeks that Australia's regional exposure to Middle East supply disruption was acute, given the country's minimal strategic reserve compared to IEA member benchmarks. Australia is an IEA member. The benchmark is 90 days of net import cover. Australia is nowhere near it. That gap, which Hanson says she raised in Senate estimates in 2019 and 2021, is now the lived reality of 2025. Here is where it all lands. A Prime Minister gave a national address this week designed to calm Australians down. A senator who has been raising alarm about fuel security for 6 years sat in front of a camera the same week and said, "This is blunder after blunder. I've been warning about this for years." And here we are. The farmers in the Riverina don't have 30 days to wait for political spin to catch up with reality. The AMBOs and police officers and hospital workers in regional towns need to know their fuel is guaranteed. The ships need commercial certainty to keep coming. The oil sitting in the Timor Sea needs someone with the political will to act. None of those problems are solved by a national address. So the question for you is this. Does the Prime Minister's measured reassurance match the reality you are seeing in your community? And if senators like Pauline Hanson were raising these exact issues in Parliament 6 years ago, in 2019, in 2021, why did it take a full-blown crisis for anyone to start listening? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story matters to you, share it, particularly with someone in a rural or regional area who is living this right now. And subscribe if you want political coverage that tracks what politicians actually said years before the crisis hits, not just after.